Here is the only sound is the slow, rhythmic hiss of air. His own breathing, unnaturally loud in the silent, black water. Above, a distorted yellow smear of torchlight dances on the oily surface. A shadow passes over it, a long, slender boat. The dip and pull of oars, barely a whisper through the dense medium of water. The diver holds his breath anyway, a reflex. He flattens himself against the rough stone of the quay, feeling the cold seep through his wetsuit. He is a ghost from 2,000 years in the future, and the men in that boat, grumbling about the cold Britannia night, have no category in their minds for what lurks just beneath them. What if the ultimate tool of modern stealth, a combat diver, enters a Roman naval base? Could a single operator with no weapons neutralize the symbol of imperial power? Chapter 1: The Shadow and the Eagle. The world of the Centurion was one of predictable threats. Valerius stood on the edge of the stone quay, the damp air clinging to his wool cloak. His harbor, a muddy fjord carved into the coast of a rebellious island, was the northernmost tooth in the jaw of the empire. From here, his three triremes, the Aquila, the Lupa, and the Victrix, projected Roman authority into the mists. His concerns were tangible. Gulls cry, the tide turns. The local tribes might try a night raid in hide boats. His security was built for that world. Watchtowers at the harbor mouth, their torches casting long, flickering fingers of light across the water. A heavy chain that could be raised between them. Patrol boats, each with 4 legionaries and a lantern, making their slow circuit every quarter of an hour. And nets, of course. Thick rope nets submerged just below the surface to foul the hulls of any sneaking craft. Valerius pulled his cloak tighter. The world was as it should be. The Aquila, his flagship, sat tethered and silent, a 120-foot beast of timber and bronze, sleeping under the watch of his men.
50 feet below Valerius, the diver was a creature of a different reality. His world was pressure, temperature, and time. On his wrist, a dive computer glowed with soft red numerals, depth 15 meters, time remaining 58 minutes. The mission clock was dictated by the tide. Once it turned, the outflowing current would make a silent exfiltration impossible. His objective was surgical. Immobilize the Aquila. No explosions, no hull damage, no casualties. The mission was about paralysis, not destruction. Prove that the untouchable could be touched. His kit was alien, a closed-circuit rebreather that scrubbed his carbon dioxide and recycled his oxygen, releasing no telltale bubbles. Carbon fiber fins that gave him silent, efficient propulsion. His only tools were designed for elegant sabotage. A pouch held 2 magnetic clamps attached to buoyant packs of high-tensile line, designed to foul oars and keels. Another held a tube of military-grade epoxy, capable of curing underwater. He was not here to fight Romans, he was here to fight physics. The hydrodynamics of a rudder, the mechanics of an oar bank. He moved from the sea cave that served as his ingress point, staying deep. The torchlight from above was a distant, wavering ceiling. His first obstacle appeared as a faint grid in the murky water, the harbor's anti-ship netting. To Valerius, it was a wall. To the diver, it was a simple gate. A few careful cuts with a ceramic blade, and he slipped through the gap, the heavy ropes parting with a silence that felt like a violation of history. Chapter 2: A Whisper Against the Hull. The hull of the Aquila was a mountain range in the dark. It rose from the silty harbor floor, vast and intimidating. It smelled of tar and brine. Barnacles and sea growth clung to the timber, a living camouflage that he now shared. He ran a gloved hand along the keel. It was a strange intimacy, touching this ancient war machine.
He started at the stern. The trireme steering was managed by 2 massive rudders, one on each side. He found the port side rudder, a huge paddle of oak swung on bronze pintles. This was his first target. He unsealed the tube of two-part epoxy. The thick, gray paste felt cold in his hands. Working quickly, he forced it into the gaps of the rudder's mounting bracket, jamming the space between the gudgeon and pintle. It wasn't about breaking it was about freezing it in place. The chemistry of the 21st century against the mechanics of the first. He was halfway through when he felt a change in the water, a subtle pressure wave. He froze. Above, the rhythmic splash of the patrol boat's oars grew louder. The yellow lantern light began to sweep across the hull above him. There was nowhere to go. He pressed himself into the curve where the rudder met the stern post, making himself part of the ship's shadow. The light washed over the water just feet from his head, the glare blinding even through the murk. On the boat, a legionary leaned over, peering into the blackness. "See anything, Decius?" the patrol leader asked. "Nothing but my own ugly face, sir," the soldier grumbled and spat into the water. The glob of spittle drifted down, a tiny cloud dissolving just above the diver's head. The boat moved on, its light receding. The diver let out the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The hiss of his rebreather was a roar in the sudden silence. Time was burning, 32 minutes left. He moved from the now compromised rudder to the ship's midsection, to its primary weapon and engine, the oar banks. The Aquila carried 170 oarsmen, a human engine of devastating power. But that power depended on synchronization. Chaos was his weapon. He unclipped the first sabotage pack. It was a simple, ingenious device. A powerful magnet clamped it to the bronze ram at the ship's bow. He swam down the length of the keel, unreeling the fine, dark line. He did the same on the other side. The lines were now draped loosely beneath the hull, directly under the rows of oars. Attached to the end of each line was a buoyant float, currently held down by a soluble gate. In about 2 hours, the gate would dissolve and the floats would rise, pulling the lines up and creating a cat's cradle of high-tensile chaos around the submerged oars. When the morning crew tried to row, they wouldn't just be out of sync, they'd be hopelessly, infuriatingly tangled. Final target, the anchor. A trireme carried several, but he focused on the main bower anchor. He found its thick rope line running down into the silt. Following it back up to the hull, he found the household it passed through. He couldn't cut the rope, that was too obvious. Instead, he took his second sabotage pack, a smaller device with a powerful clamp and a simple expanding bar. He wedged it deep inside the household, right against the anchor rope, and armed it. At dawn, a chemical trigger would release the spring-loaded bar, pinning the rope in place with a ton of pressure. The anchor couldn't be cut, and it couldn't be raised. The Aquila was now chained to the harbor floor. His work was done. 9 minutes left on the clock. The tide was beginning to pull.
The morning trumpet cut through the mist. On the deck of the Aquila, the crew moved with practiced efficiency, the Centurion watching from the quay. "Weigh anchor! Prepare to make way!" the ship's hortator yelled. The men on the capstan threw their weight against the bars. The machine groaned and stopped. The rope was taut, the anchor lodged. More men were called. They heaved, their muscles straining, the wood of the capstan creaking in protest. Nothing! The anchor would not budge. Valerius's face tightened. "Fouled on a rock, you idiots? Use the auxiliary!" He was annoyed, but not yet alarmed. Delays happened. "Oarsmen, to your posts! Give us slow strokes, starboard only! Let's pivot off this damned rock!" The oars were run out. The oarmaster began his rhythmic call. And pull! 170 oars dipped into the water. They moved a few feet, and then chaos. Oars jammed, lines snapped taut, yanking oars from the hands of surprised rowers. Men cursed as their equipment was wrenched sideways, tangled with their neighbors. The synchronized engine had become a heap of splintered wood and frayed rope. On the port side, another team tried to move the great rudder to assist. It was fused in place, as if carved from the same block as the hull. The Aquila, pride of the Northern Fleet, was dead in the water. It couldn't turn, it couldn't move, it couldn't leave.
Valerius stared, his mind refusing to process the scene. There was no sign of attack, no fire, no bodies, no enemy ships. The watchmen had seen nothing. The patrols had reported a quiet night. It was impossible. His men checked the hull from small boats. They found the tangled lines, the jammed anchor rope, the frozen rudder, but they couldn't explain how it happened. The materials were strange, the lines impossibly thin and strong, the substance in the rudder joint hard as iron. It was sabotage, but of a kind he had never seen. It felt like witchcraft, a curse whispered on the tide.
Did the diver change history? Not in the grand sense. The Aquila would eventually be freed. It would take days of labor, perhaps even careening the ship on the beach at high tide to work on the hull. The campaign against the local tribes would be delayed by a week, maybe 2. But the true impact was a seed of doubt. A report would be sent to Rome, a confusing tale of a ship bewitched in a secure harbor. An imperial asset was rendered useless by a ghost, leaving no trace. The story would become a legend among the sailors in Britannia, a warning about the strange magic of this foggy, cursed island. The diver didn't break a ship. He broke the absolute certainty of Roman power. Could it have gone differently? Easily. If the patrol legionary had been more alert, if a dropped torch had forced him to stare into the water for a few seconds longer, he might have seen the faintest outline of a man-shaped shadow. An alarm, spears, nets thrown into the water, and the ghost would have become a corpse. Or, if the mission had allowed for explosives, the outcome would be starkly different. A single limpet mine would have blown the rudder off and punched a hole in the hull. The Aquila would be at the bottom of the harbor, but it would have been an understandable attack. An enemy had struck. This silent paralysis was something else entirely. It was a message. This scenario reveals a few core truths. First, technology creates new forms of invisibility. The diver's rebreather and low-light mask didn't make him a Superman. They simply allowed him to operate in a dimension the Romans couldn't perceive. Their security was two-dimensional, focused on the surface. He was a three-dimensional threat. Second, the most effective sabotage isn't always the most destructive. By immobilizing the trireme without destroying it, he created a problem the Romans couldn't easily solve or explain. It attacked their morale and their sense of order, which were far more valuable than a single ship's hull. Finally, it shows that even the mightiest empire is vulnerable to an opponent who refuses to play by the established rules of engagement. The Romans were prepared for a fight. They weren't prepared for a whisper in the dark.
Change one rule. To give the Centurion a fighting chance, what would you add to his defenses? A. Train seals to detect underwater intruders. B. Tripwires with bells strung just below the surface around the ships. Or C. Glass-bottom buckets for the patrol boats to see below the surface glare. What would you tweak?